Managing multiple clients or large websites? Automate your SEO with Ali AI. Start your free trial now.
Taylor Swift is a link builder. There were rumors that she would get engaged. Our client said, let's give them a free wedding venue. And then we got them 50 links. That's digital PR.
Wix Studio, one end-to-end web creation platform for your agency to deliver exceptional work with absolute efficiency.
A warm welcome to everyone here in the room, especially on behalf of Majestic, who is the lovely organizer of this talk. So, 1.7 million liters of water needs a Google data center every day. That's over 600 million liters of water a year, and Google has approximately 23 data centers around the world. When I mention numbers like this, in a marketing meeting, C-suite meeting, at least in the last couple of 1 or 2 years, I experienced that people are a little bit more aware of the fact that Google's resources are not God-given, and they may need to think about allocation. Because if you think that Google is spending billions of dollars for their infrastructure, it is totally fine that they need to be more or even better in allocating their resources. It is just expensive. And therefore, it was with no surprise that actually already in 2022, Gary Elias from Google started to talk about crawling efficiency, and that Google needs to be better in allocating its crawling capacities and even be more environmental friendly. And he actually went a little bit further, and he already mentioned a topic where you think that Google needs to be better in, and that is the area of refresh crawls. So what he's actually thinking is that from a Google perspective, it doesn't make any sense to hit the same URLs again and again and again, although there was no change at all. This is what he called wasteful, and I think he's totally right with that. Some weeks ago, there was another discussion, and where he was actually asked about if Google has already slowed down its crawling in general. And he answered to that actually in a negatively way. However, he said, no, what we got already better in scheduling. So Google is definitely proactively working on how they allocate their crawling resources, and that should be in our mind. Some days ago, there was another discussion where he actually talked about indexing, and he said something quite interesting, because generally speaking, he said that depending on the space Google has, that may end up in a solution where Google is, indexing more low-quality content. If they have enough space, more low-quality content may be in the SERPs. Of course, that is interesting because the other way around, that means that if there's less space and more competition and even higher quality content, it may be difficult to get indexed. And when we talk about crawling, we need to go back to the actually 3 main reasons why we always talk about crawl budget optimization. And the first one is, of course, every content that needs, or that is written the first time shall be processed and indexed very, very fast. The second reason is actually that every content that gets updated or refreshed needs to be, again, evaluated and updated. And of course, we want to do that in the most efficient way because, as we know, crawling or crawl budget is actually nothing else than computer timing. So the faster Google can actually process a website, and get everything done, the more information they can process in a given time. And there are some other facts we still need to have in mind sometimes. So for example, that crawl budget is allocated by the host, which is, for example, important when you think about a big website that runs a forum or CDN on a directory rather than a subdomain. That can influence your crawl budget. Or that, for example, every Google bot is actually counting into the crawl budget, not just the regular web bot. And when we think about, the fact that there are quite a lot of files that can be indexed by Google. It's not just about HTML, JavaScript, CSS. It is about what is on your server, not what is on your infrastructure. Because are you sure that one of those are not on your server? When we see, infrastructures like this, I think it totally makes sense to discuss, relevancy and also efficiency. Because, some websites have more than 30, times more URLs on the site than they actually put into the index. However, Google needs to process everything from that. And of course, we need to remind ourselves that if we talk about crawling, we do not talk about indexing. So these are two different things. So when we have all these lovely no-index URLs on the side and maybe also canonicals and things like that, that still needs to be processed and is going into your crawl budget in general. In 2022, there was actually another interesting let's say, quote by Martin Splitt from Google, when he actually talked about JavaScript crawling and how Google is actually processing JavaScript crawling. And he said that, well, while Google is already fetching the HTML, it can decide if the HTML is good or bad. And if the HTML is bad, maybe that delay the entire process of that URL. So it's not even about maybe that JavaScript is, hurting you. It's about the HTML is bad. And that, of course, is, valid for, in general, for everything. But it also gives us an idea of there must be a multi-step approach. There must be some kind of quality mechanism in that entire process. And then when we look at the Search Console, it definitely makes sense because we know that everything that gets found by Google gets not even processed, or not everything that gets processed is not even indexed. So there is some kind of process behind that. When we talk about crawling, we need to touch the field of status codes just for a second. Of course, we all know and should know that when your server is not responding very consistently, Google will take away its crawling resources very, very fast. So just have that in mind in general. But however, that is extremely important for at least one file, and that is the robots.txt. Because if that file is providing a 400 status code over time, it may end up in the total de-indexation of your website. Stay until the late end of the session because Jenna is talking about much more of the robots.txt, so I will stick it with here. However, then we need to talk about the 400 status codes, of course, because Google is generally speaking that they are, they have no impact on your crawl budget. However, there's one exception, and that is at 429. It gets a little bit geeky. That one is actually saying too many requests, and that sounds quite similar to a server error, actually, however. So have that in mind that there is at least one status code that may infect your crawl budget when it comes down to the 400 status code. And then we need to touch the field of IPs, actually. In 2021, Google published its IPs, and that was extremely helpful, especially for those websites that work with techniques like dynamic surveying and reverse DNS lookup. So websites that try to, optimize the way how Google is crawling them by maybe hiding some functionalities like facade navigations and things like that. So, however, by publishing the IPs, something else got actually quite more easier, and that was actually blocking all the fake bots. So probably you have been experienced in the last couple of, months or years even, that you run even more often in these kind of blocking mechanisms because the websites already know that you are a fake bot. If you pretend to be the Google bot by switching your user agent or something like that, they definitely know that by just, looking at the IPs. However, that is actually the lovely thing they can do. I mean, if you remember that case from Reddit, of course, Reddit did not block Bing, did not block Google, but they used actually the same technique, reverse DNS lookup, to simply show Google a different robots.txt than anyone else. Some people are freaking out because they thought that Reddit is blocking Google. Of course, they didn't. They just used reverse DNS lookup and that technique to simply show Google something different. Of course, Reddit did block Bing actually, but that is probably for another political reason. Before we switch into some data, just two other notes actually. First of all, when we talk about crawling, we need to talk about log files because log files is the most accurate piece of information you can have to analyze what Google is actually doing on your server. Everything else is just a simulation. Every web crawl from your tools is just a simulation. Log file is the only valid source to know what Google is actually doing on your server. And the most important information to have is there, of course, the host and the IP, because again, you don't want to mix up the information from different subdomains. That would make everything quite inaccurate. And the other thing is you want to include the IP because otherwise you may look at all the fake bots. The other thing is you need to understand where your data is actually coming from because some websites work with something like a load balancer. And a load balancer is actually then before your original server. And the load balancer is the point of contact for the Google request. However, the load balancer is able to rewrite information like, for example, status codes. And I had that twice in my career that I received server log files. I crawled the website. I have received the information from the load balancer and there was no match. So have that in mind. If you request server log files, you need to understand where they get from. In case you have no log files at all, at least the one thing you can do is you can use the crawl statistics, of course, in your Search Console, and you can also, use the API to get a piece of information when, for example, it has been Google last crawled a specific URL. And with that information over time, you can at least work a little bit to see if there are any areas Google is not visiting quite often. Maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe you need to improve your internal linking, something like that. So there is no excuse. You can start already with that a little bit. However, just imagine you do a regular web crawl, right? And you come out at roughly 30,000 domains, 30,000 URLs, so nothing too big actually. And then you look at the Search Console and you see there are nearly 300,000 pages indexed, beside the, some millions on the side. You definitely know in that particular moment that there must be something in between, right? So between the web crawl and what is indexed, actually, this is too much of a gap. So there must be often pages. There must be something on the server your web crawler is not even, have access to. The next thing you usually do is you're adding some kind of Search Console data just to see if there are more additional information. And in that particular case, actually, we found out that, from these pages on the server, there from the web crawl, actually just 10,000 are generating rankings, but there are even more than 60,000 or nearly 60,000 actually often ranking pages on that server. So again, another signal that on the server is more than your web crawl would actually, see. And then we added log files to that. And this is where it really got mad, because we discovered over 700,000 orphan pages on that server. But we also found out that nearly 50% of the pages in that structure are not even crawled by Google at all. And then the question is, what is the next thing you can actually do? And probably one thing I like to do is I like to build segments. So I try to get a lot of different views on the data just to understand maybe or to find some kind of inefficiencies. And the lovely thing about segmentation is you can do that in so many ways. You can do that by directories, you can do that by URL types, you can do that by your CPs versus your PDPs, your international pages versus your regional pages. I can even do that by authors to see if their content is getting crawled by Google. There are no limitations when it comes down to segmentation. So one thing we actually could look at, is again the orphan pages and try to understand how many orphan pages do we have that reach a certain amount of sessions, for example. Because I don't want to work maybe with the lower ones, but I'm quite interested in the ones that actually have a lot of traffic in the past, but are actually not in the infrastructure. Or we can have a look at pages that generate traffic and are being crawled against those that generate traffic but are not even crawled. And I can find out a way how to reallocate actually Google's resources so that they start to recrawl these pages more often. And of course, we can again look at something like a directory level pages that are being crawled and indexed against those that are just being crawled and those that are not even crawled at all, just to identify inefficiencies in our structure and maybe from there take some measures to improve the structure. Then, of course, we can have a look at the status codes. And here in particular, we need to understand that the devil lies in the details. If you look at that, that looks actually quite a lot, lovely, a lot of green. However, if you look down, then there's another 200 status code, and that is a 204. And that one is actually saying, I'm here, but I'm empty. I have no content at all. It's a perfect soft 404 you can even imagine. And if 70% of all Google requests are answered by that status code, you definitely want to investigate that. Especially if you think that there's another status code out there, which is a 304. And if that one is actually put on top of a 204, then it really gets bad. Because if the 304, which means not modified, is actually telling you that there are URLs that has not been changed, when you don't think about that, it may end up in a situation where you have, again, a lot of these empty pages, but you think, they are actually not touched, so everything is fine. So you really need to go the next step to really understand what is actually behind these status codes. And then, of course, we can look at, a lot of other KPIs, like the unique crawled number of pages, which is lovely. For example, if you know that you have an infrastructure of 500,000 URLs, and you instantly know with that number, actually, if Google is crawling more or less than you have. So you have something like a baseline always to understand where they are. Or we can look at the number of newly crawled pages, which is also lovely if you have a dynamic infrastructure. Let's say you publish every day 5,000 URLs. you simply can see if Google is really processing everything from that by the day-to-day level. We can have a look at, the frequency over time, which is also quite interesting when we implement measures, just to see if Google is really responding in a way we expect, and if Google is really, reallocating its resources because we wanted them to go deeper in another area. We can look at our lovely paginations, to be honest. So long-term no index leads to no follow. We all know that, but however, there are quite a lot of paginations that actually get, crawled quite good. If we can do that with paginations, we can actually do that with every kind of URL status. We can do that with no-index URLs. We can do that with parameter URLs, with canonical text, just to understand where is actually Google allocating its resources, and does that make sense? What we are actually always try to do is we try to find inefficiencies and try to reallocate their resources so that, our content really gets processed quite good. We can have a look at log files and requests combined with the word count, actually. I mean, we know word count is not a ranking signal. However, maybe there's a case that your thinner content gets, crawled less. And if it gets crawled less, why is it even there in the first place? Maybe you can pitch something like a content budget just because of that. So try to understand that. We can have a look at the weight of the URL. All the lovely image galleries, all the lovely articles with videos or something like that. Is that actually affecting the way how Google is crawling your website? And does that make sense from your perspective? We can have a look at the depth of the architecture, just to understand if there are maybe some pages way in the back, which are actually quite important, and you may need to pull them higher in the hierarchy just to make sure that they are processed, again, more often. We can have a look at the date or the age of a content is actually affecting the crawling, and if over time Google is spending less and less of its resources for your older content, and what does it actually mean? Does it even make sense to provide these URLs again or even longer, or do you want to maybe get rid of some of them? And then there's something like situations where URLs have even an expiry date. So think about a second-hand shop where every URL is just a product, and if it is sold, it is gone. Does it even make sense to include URLs like that into your infrastructure to get that processed by Google so that they spend time on it? Or do we have to rethink how we actually organize our content, our inventory, just to make sure that everything gets processed in an efficient way? And then there's one last thing you can have a look at, and that is a lovely KPI called fresh rank. And the fresh rank is actually saying you the average number of days between the first Google hit and the first organic hit. And if you think about that and you use that on scale, you have actually in line the date when you publish your content, the date when Google is hitting it, and the day when the first traffic arrives. And with that, over time on scale, you can improve even your forecasting for your content planning and all that kind of stuff. So that was it for me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you see the value of crawling and crawl budget optimization till today. There's a lot you can discover in your log files, so go for that. Start to build segments on all the data you have, put everything together, and try to really build segments on that, get a different view from that, look at it from a different perspective, because oftentimes there are a lot of inefficiencies you really can find. Thank you for your coming, and enjoy the rest of the Brighton SEO.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.